The sound of shattering glass pierced the evening quiet as Hannah Verdon's father slammed his fist down on their modest kitchen table. The year was 1875, and Alta, Utah had become a place where dreams disappeared into the mountain mines as quickly as the silver they yielded. "You don't understand, Hannah," Walter Verdon slurred, his eyes bloodshot from whiskey and shame. "I was so close to winning it all back." Hannah stared at her father, a once proud man now reduced to trembling hands and broken promises. At 22, she had grown accustomed to his gambling habits, but tonight was different. The desperation in his voice sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the autumn mountain air seeping through their cabin walls. "How much this time?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her heart. The lamp flickered, casting long shadows across her father's gaunt face. Walter couldn't meet her gaze. "Everything, the house, the land," he paused, swallowing hard, "and more." "What do you mean, more?" Hannah's knuckles turned white as she gripped the edge of her apron. Before Walter could answer, a heavy knock echoed through their small home. Her father flinched, and Hannah knew whatever waited on the other side of that door would change everything. She opened it to find Maxwell Thornton, owner of the Silver Spur Saloon and the wealthiest man in Alta. His expensive suit and gold pocket watch seemed obscenely out of place in their humble doorway. Behind him stood two men whose expressions suggested they weren't there for pleasant conversation. "Miss Verdon," Thornton tipped his hat with exaggerated courtesy, "I believe your father has something to discuss with you." Hannah turned to Walter, who had shrunk into his chair like a wounded animal. "Father, I had no choice," he whispered. "I signed a contract. 3 months of your service at the Silver Spur to clear my debts." The room spun around Hannah. "Service? What kind of service?" Thornton's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Nothing unseemly, my dear. Serving drinks, entertaining guests with your lovely singing voice that I've heard so much about. Unless, of course, you'd prefer more lucrative arrangements." "This is madness," Hannah said, backing away. "I won't do it." "The contract is binding." Thornton pulled a folded document from his breast pocket. "Your father's signature is right here. You begin tomorrow, or you both lose everything and face jail besides." Walter sobbed quietly, a broken man drowning in his failures. Hannah felt a surge of both pity and rage toward him. "I'll give you until morning to pack your belongings," Thornton said, placing the contract on the table. "My men will escort you to your new quarters above the saloon at first light." After they left, Hannah sat in stunned silence beside her father. The cabin that had been her home for all her life suddenly felt like a prison with walls closing in. "I'm sorry," Walter repeated, the words hollow and meaningless now. Hannah didn't sleep that night. She packed a small bag with her mother's locket, a few dresses, and the worn Bible that had been her companion since childhood. As dawn broke over the Wasatch Mountains, she heard horses approaching. But instead of Thornton's men, a single rider appeared. Blake Hayes dismounted his palomino with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. At 28, he was already a legend in these parts, a cowboy who'd made his fortune driving cattle and was now owner of the Hayes Ranch just outside town. "Miss Verdon," he called, removing his hat. The morning light caught in his dark hair, revealing streaks of auburn. "I heard about what happened. May I come in?" Hannah hesitated, then nodded. She had known Blake Hayes only in passing a tip of his hat in town, a polite greeting at church. What business could he have with her family's disgrace? Blake entered, ducking slightly under the low doorframe. His presence filled the small space, making it seem even smaller. "Mr. Hayes," Walter stammered, rising unsteadily to his feet. "I don't understand. I came to make an offer," Blake said, his voice low and measured. "I know about the contract with Thornton." Hannah felt her cheeks burn with shame. "The whole town knows, I suppose." "Not yet," Blake replied, his gaze meeting hers, "but Thornton isn't known for his discretion." He placed a leather pouch on the table. The unmistakable sound of coins clinked inside. "I want to buy the contract." Walter's eyes widened. "Why would you do that?" "Because what Thornton is doing isn't right," Blake said simply. "I need help at my ranch. The housekeeper left last month, and things are in disarray. Miss Verdon would be properly employed with fair wages and her own quarters." Hannah studied him skeptically. "And what would you expect in return?" "Honest work, nothing more," Blake answered, a flash of something like hurt crossing his features. I'm not Thornton. Before Hannah could respond, hoofbeats approached again. Thornton and his men had arrived. Time's up, Miss Verdon, Thornton announced, striding in without knocking. He stopped short at the sight of Blake. Hayes, what brings you here so early? Business, Blake replied coolly. I'm buying Miss Verdon's contract. Thornton laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. It's not for sale. $500 says otherwise. Blake nudged the pouch toward Thornton. The saloon owner's eyes narrowed. The debt is $700. Without hesitation, Blake reached into his vest and pulled out more money. $700 then. Hannah watched this exchange with growing disbelief. No one had ever stood up to Thornton like this, certainly not on her behalf. Thornton looked at the money, then at Hannah, calculation evident in his gaze. The girl's worth more to me. She'll bring in customers with that face and voice. $800, Blake countered. Final offer. A tense silence filled the room. Finally, Thornton snatched the money with a curse. Fine, she's your problem now. He threw the contract onto the table, but I want it known I did Walter a favor. After Thornton and his men left, Blake turned to Hannah. The offer stands as I said it. Proper employment, your own quarters, fair wages, but the choice is yours. Hannah looked at her father, who sat with his head in his hands, then back to Blake. Why are you really doing this, Mr. Hayes? Blake's gaze was steady. Because 5 years ago, my father lost everything to Thornton's tables. He didn't live to see what came after. He picked up the contract. No one should own another person's life. With deliberate movements, Blake struck a match and held it to the edge of the paper. The contract curled and blackened, turning to ash. You're free to choose, Miss Verdon. My offer of employment stands regardless. Hannah felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest, hope, perhaps, or the first fragile tendrils of trust. I accept your offer, Mr. Hayes. When do I start? Now, if you're ready, he said, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. Hannah gathered her bag and turned to her father. I'll send money when I can. Walter nodded, shame etched into every line of his face. I'll make this right somehow, Hannah, I promise. Promises from her father had lost their meaning long ago, but Hannah merely nodded and followed Blake outside. The Hayes Ranch sprawled across a valley 20 minutes outside Alta. The main house was larger than Hannah had imagined, with a wide porch and large windows. Several outbuildings dotted the property, and in the distance, cattle grazed on autumn gold pastures. It's not what I expected, Hannah admitted as Blake helped her down from his horse. My father started with nothing, Blake explained, leading her toward the house. He built this place one board at a time. I've tried to honor that by building it further. Inside, Hannah understood what Blake had meant about disarray. While the house was solidly built and well-furnished, it clearly needed a woman's touch. Dishes were stacked haphazardly, books and papers cluttered every surface, and dust had settled on the mantelpiece. Your quarters are through here, Blake said, showing her to a small but pleasant room off the kitchen. It has its own entrance if you want privacy. The room was clean, with a comfortable bed, dresser, and a small writing desk beneath a window overlooking a garden gone slightly wild. Thank you, Hannah said, setting down her bag. I'll start on the kitchen first. Blake nodded. I have to check the north pasture. I'll be back by supper. He hesitated at the door. Miss Verdon, I want to be clear. You're my employee, not my property. If at any point you want to leave, you're free to go. After he left, Hannah stood alone in the quiet house, trying to make sense of the whirlwind her life had become in just 24 hours. Then she rolled up her sleeves and set to work. By evening, the kitchen gleamed. Hannah had found enough supplies to prepare a simple but hearty stew, fresh bread, and apple pie from the laden trees in the garden. When Blake returned, the transformation stopped him in his tracks. This is remarkable, he said, inhaling deeply. It hasn't smelled like this since my mother was alive. They ate at the kitchen table, an awkward silence between them at first. Gradually, as Blake complimented her cooking and asked about her day, the tension eased. May I ask what happened to your mother? Hannah ventured, noticing how his eyes sometimes drifted to the empty chair at the head of the table. Fever took her when I was 16, Blake replied. My father never really recovered, started gambling, drinking. The ranch nearly went under. I'm sorry, Hannah said softly. My mother died when I was 12. Childbirth. The baby didn't survive either. Blake nodded, understanding in his eyes. It leaves a hole nothing quite fills, doesn't it? That night, lying in her new bed, Hannah tried to reconcile the man who had burned her contract with the lonely rancher sharing supper at his kitchen table. Blake Hayes was not what she expected, and for the first time in years she fell asleep without worry gnawing at her insides. Days turned into weeks as Hannah settled into life at Hayes Ranch. The house transformed under her care, and she discovered a satisfaction in watching rooms come alive again. Blake spent his days managing the ranch, often returning muddy or dusty, but always with a word of appreciation for her work. They fell into a comfortable routine. Breakfast at dawn, a brief discussion of the day's tasks, then each to their work until supper. Sometimes Blake would read aloud in the evenings while Hannah mended or knitted. Other times they simply talked, learning the contours of each other's lives. Hannah learned that Blake had fought briefly in the closing days of the Civil War, returning to find his father in debt and the ranch in disrepair. He'd worked tirelessly to restore both, only to lose his father 2 years later. Blake discovered that Hannah had a gift for numbers, having kept her father's books since she was 15. She could also play the piano, though they didn't have one, and knew enough medicine to stitch a wound or break a fever. "Where did you learn all this?" he asked one evening as she dressed a cut on his hand, the result of a mishap with a fence post. "My mother believed girls should be educated," Hannah replied, tying off the bandage. "Father thought it was nonsense, but after she died, he was too busy at the mines to stop me from reading every book I could find." Blake flexed his hand, testing her handiwork. "Your mother was a wise woman." As autumn deepened toward winter, something else deepened between them, a friendship built on mutual respect that gradually revealed itself as something more. Hannah found herself watching for Blake's return each evening, her heart quickening at the sound of his boots on the porch. Blake discovered reasons to remain in the house during the day, asking her opinion on ranch matters or simply bringing her wildflowers he'd found while checking fences. The first snow came in early November, blanketing the valley in white silence. Hannah woke to find Blake already outside, clearing paths between the house and barn. Through the window, she watched him work, strong and sure in his movements. When he caught her looking, he smiled and waved, and Hannah felt warmth spread through her despite the frost on the glass. That evening, as they sat before the fire, Blake cleared his throat nervously. "I've been meaning to ask. There's a harvest dance in town next weekend. Would you consider attending with me?" Hannah looked up from her sewing, surprised. "As your housekeeper?" "No," Blake said quietly. "As my guest, my companion." The word hung between them, laden with possibility. "People will talk," Hannah warned, though her pulse had quickened. "Let them," Blake replied. "Unless you're concerned about being seen with me." "No," Hannah said quickly. "I'd be honored to accompany you." The night of the dance arrived crisp and clear, stars sharp as diamonds above the mountains. Hannah wore her best dress, a deep blue that brought out the amber flecks in her eyes. She'd spent extra time with her hair, arranging it in soft curls that framed her face. When she emerged from her room, Blake stood waiting by the fireplace. He'd traded his work clothes for a tailored suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. "You are beautiful," Blake said finally, the words carrying the weight of absolute truth. The town hall had been transformed with autumn leaves, pumpkins, and dozens of candles. As they entered, conversations paused, heads turned. Hannah felt the stares and whispers like physical things pressing against her skin. "Ignore them," Blake murmured, his hand warm at the small of her back. They danced, Hannah's doubts melting away with each turn around the floor. Blake moved with surprising grace for such a tall man, guiding her confidently through waltzes and reels. During a break in the music, Maxwell Thornton approached, his smile sharp as a knife. "Miss Verdon, what a transformation. Hayes must be paying you well for your services." Blake's hand tightened on Hannah's arm. "Mind your implications, Thornton." "No implication intended," Thornton replied smoothly. "I merely observe that our Miss Verdon has risen quickly from disgraced daughter to the companion of Alta's most eligible bachelor." Hannah felt color flood her cheeks, but before she could respond, Blake stepped forward. "Miss Verdon deserves respect." he said, voice low and dangerous. Something you wouldn't recognize if it introduced itself with a calling card. Thornton's smile didn't waver. I wonder what the good people of Alta would think if they knew the true nature of your arrangement. There's nothing to know, Hannah interjected, finding her voice. Mr. Hayes offered me honest employment when you tried to exploit my father's weakness. That's the beginning and end of it. Around them, dancers had stopped to watch the confrontation. Thornton glanced at the gathering crowd and seemed to reconsider his approach. Perhaps I was mistaken, he said, though his eyes remained cold. Enjoy your evening. As he walked away, Hannah realized she was trembling. Blake led her outside where the night air was sharp with approaching winter. I'm sorry, he said. I shouldn't have brought you here. No, Hannah shook her head. I'm glad you did. I won't let him or anyone else make me ashamed. Blake studied her face in the moonlight. You're remarkable, Hannah Verdon. It was the first time he'd used her given name. The sound of it in his voice sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. Blake, she responded in kind, testing the shape of his name on her lips. He stepped closer, his gaze dropping to her mouth. May I? Hannah answered by rising on her tiptoes, closing the distance between them. His kiss was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. When she responded, wrapping her arms around his neck, the kiss deepened into something that made her forget the cold, forget Thornton. Forget everything but the feel of Blake's arms around her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Blake rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since the day you reorganized my bookshelf and scolded me for dog-earing the pages. Hannah laughed, the sound crystallizing in the frosty air. I've wanted you to since you burned that contract. They returned to the dance, but the weight of others' judgments no longer seemed important. They danced until the musicians packed their instruments, then rode home under stars so bright they cast shadows. At the ranch, Blake walked Hannah to her door, reluctant to see the evening end. I don't want you to think. That is, I hope you know I respect you too much to. Hannah silenced him with another kiss. I know, she whispered. Good night, Blake. That night marked a turning point. In the weeks that followed, Blake and Hannah grew closer, their relationship deepening beyond employer and employee. They still maintained separate quarters, mindful of propriety, but their feelings were clear to anyone who saw them together. Winter settled over Alta with a vengeance, bringing howling blizzards that confined them to the house for days at a time. They passed the hours reading to each other, playing cards, and talking long into the night. Blake taught Hannah to play chess. She taught him to make her mother's secret recipe for cinnamon rolls. One evening, as snow piled against the windows and wind moaned in the chimney, Blake took Hannah's hand across the chessboard. I have something to ask you, he said, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. Hannah's heart stuttered. Yes. Before Blake could continue, frantic knocking interrupted. He rose with a frown and opened the door to find Walter Verdon, half frozen and desperate. Mr. Verdon. Blake helped the older man inside. What are you doing out in this storm? Hannah, Walter gasped, his eyes wild. Hannah, you have to hide. Thornton knows. He knows everything. Hannah rushed to her father's side. What are you talking about? What does he know? Walter collapsed into a chair, shivering violently as Hannah wrapped a blanket around his shoulders. He found letters from your mother's family in Denver. There's money, Hannah, a lot of money. Your grandfather died and left everything to you. What? Hannah stared in disbelief. That's impossible. Mother always said her family disowned her when she married you. They did, Walter admitted miserably. But your grandfather changed his will before he died last year. Thornton intercepted the lawyer's letters. That's why he wanted you at the Silver Spur to control you until he could force you to sign over the inheritance. Blake's expression hardened. How do you know this? I overheard him talking to his men, Walter explained. They're coming for Hannah tonight, papers already drawn up. They'll force her signature one way or another. Hannah felt the blood drain from her face. But that's illegal. Surely the sheriff's in Thornton's pocket, Blake said grimly. Has been for years, Walter nodded. I came as soon as I could slip away. You have to leave, Hannah. Go to Denver, claim what's yours before Thornton can stop you. Blake was already moving, gathering supplies. We'll leave tonight. The northern pass should still be clear enough. Hannah questioned. Blake paused, determination in every line of his body. I'm not letting you face this alone. Walter shook his head. They'll be watching the roads. Hannah needs to disappear until she can reach Denver. I know a place, Blake said after a moment's thought. An old line cabin in the high country. No one's used it for years. We can stay there until the weather clears enough to make for Denver. Hannah looked between her father and Blake. What about you, father? Walter's smile was sad but resolute. I'll lead them on a false trail south. It's the least I can do after everything. It's too dangerous, Hannah protested. Let me do this one thing right, Walter insisted, taking her hands. Let me be the father you deserved all along. An hour later, Hannah and Blake rode out into the storm, heading for the mountains. The line cabin was primitive but sturdy, a single room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn table, and bed frame covered with a straw mattress. Blake got a fire going while Hannah arranged their supplies. Neither spoke of the single bed. I'll sleep by the fire, Blake said finally, spreading his bedroll on the floor. Don't be ridiculous, Hannah replied practically. It's below freezing and that drafty floor will kill your back. The bed is large enough for both of us. Blake looked at her, surprise and something else darkening his eyes. Hannah, I don't want you to feel I trust you, she said simply. And more than that, I love you. The words hung in the air between them, unplanned but undeniably true. Blake crossed the room in 2 strides, gathering her into his arms. I love you too, he whispered against her hair. I think I have from the moment you stood in your father's doorway and faced down Maxwell Thornton without flinching. That night, they shared the bed chastely, Blake's arm around Hannah as the storm raged outside. Despite the circumstances, Hannah had never felt safer. They remained at the line cabin for 3 days while the blizzard spent its fury. On the morning of the 4th day, they awoke to brilliant sunshine reflecting off snow-covered peaks. We should be able to make Denver in 4 days if the weather holds, Blake said as they ate breakfast. Your inheritance will give you a fresh start. You can build a new life. Hannah heard the unspoken question in his voice. What about us? She asked directly. Blake set down his coffee cup. I won't pressure you, Hannah. With your inheritance, you'll be a wealthy woman. You could go anywhere, do anything. And is that what you want, for me to go? No, Blake admitted. I want you to stay with me, not as my housekeeper, but as my wife. But I need you to choose freely, not out of gratitude or obligation. Hannah moved around the table and took his face in her hands. I choose you, Blake Hayes. Money or no money, I choose you. Their kiss sealed the promise, and when they finally broke apart, Blake reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold ring. It was my mother's, he explained. I've been carrying it since the harvest dance, waiting for the right moment. This is the right moment, Hannah assured him, holding out her hand. As Blake slid the ring onto her finger, a shot rang out, splintering the window frame inches from Hannah's head. Get down, Blake shouted, pulling Hannah to the floor as more shots followed. Thornton, Hannah gasped, recognizing the saloon owner's voice calling from outside. Come out, Hayes. Bring the girl and her papers, and maybe I'll let you live. Blake crawled to his saddlebags and retrieved his revolver. Stay low, he instructed Hannah. There's a cellar trapdoor under the rug. If anything happens to me, take the south tunnel. It comes out half a mile down the mountain. I'm not leaving you, Hannah insisted. More shots peppered the cabin walls. Blake positioned himself by the window, waiting for a break in the gunfire. There are at least 3 of them, he told Hannah. Thornton and 2 others. Hayes, Thornton called again. This can end 2 ways, with you dead and the girl mine anyway, or with you walking away. Your choice. Blake met Hannah's eyes across the room. Do you trust me? With my life, she answered without hesitation. Then follow my lead. Blake raised his voice. Thornton, let's talk this through. No need for bloodshed. Now you're being sensible, Thornton replied. Send the girl out with the inheritance papers and you can ride away. I don't have any papers, Hannah called. I didn't even know about the inheritance until my father told me. Your father's a liar and a drunk, Thornton spat. The papers were delivered to your cabin months ago. I've seen them. While Thornton was speaking, Blake motioned for Hannah to move toward the trapdoor. She shook her head stubbornly. If you've seen them, then you have them, Blake reasoned. Why come after Hannah? Because they need her signature, you fool. Without it, the money stays in trust. Hannah's eyes widened with understanding. Her signature was what Thornton had always been after, first with the debt contract, now with the inheritance. "If I sign the papers, will you let Blake go?" she called, ignoring Blake's furious headshake. "Hannah, no," Blake hissed. "You have my word," Thornton answered, triumph evident in his voice. "Then I'm coming out," Hannah announced. Before Blake could stop her, she was halfway to the door. "Hannah, for God's sake," Blake grabbed her arm. "Trust me," she whispered fiercely. "When I give the signal, be ready." Before Blake could argue further, Hannah opened the door, hands raised. Thornton and two of his men stood in the clearing, rifles trained on the cabin. "Where are the papers?" Hannah asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Thornton pulled documents from inside his coat. "Right here, my dear. Just your signature and this unpleasantness is over." Hannah stepped forward, keeping herself between the gunmen and the cabin door. "I'll need to read them first." "Don't waste my time," Thornton snapped, thrusting a pen at her. "Sign." Hannah took the pen but dropped it deliberately into the snow. "Clumsy of me," she murmured, bending to retrieve it. As she straightened, she shouted, "Now, Blake!" Blake's shot caught the nearest gunman in the shoulder. As he fell, Hannah dove for the snow, rolling away from Thornton's grasp. The second gunman turned toward the cabin just as Blake emerged. Firing steadily, Thornton seized Hannah, dragging her upright with a gun to her temple. "Drop it, Hayes, or she dies right now." Blake froze, his revolver still raised. "Let her go, Thornton, it's over." "It's over when I say it's over," Thornton snarled, backing toward his horse with Hannah as his shield. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. A shot rang out from the trees beyond the clearing, catching Thornton in the arm. He screamed, his grip on Hannah loosening just enough for her to wrench free. As she dove for safety, Blake fired once more and Thornton crumpled to the snow. Walter Verdon emerged from the trees, an old hunting rifle in his hands. "Is she hurt?" he called, rushing toward Hannah. "Father." Hannah stared in disbelief. "How did you find us?" "I know these mountains," Walter replied, helping her to her feet. "And I wasn't about to let Thornton destroy what's left of my family." Blake secured the surviving gunmen, using rope from the cabin to bind them. Thornton lay moaning in the snow, his wound painful but not fatal. "We'll take them to the territorial marshal in Denver," Blake decided. "He's not in Thornton's pocket. Between your father's testimony and these men, we have enough to see Thornton imprisoned for a long time." 2 weeks later, Hannah stood on the steps of the Denver courthouse, the weight of her inheritance papers solid in her hands. The judge had not only confirmed her as the rightful heir to her grandfather's fortune, but had ordered Maxwell Thornton to stand trial for attempted kidnapping, fraud, and assault. Walter had chosen to remain in Denver, accepting a position managing one of the properties Hannah had inherited. It was a chance for a fresh start, away from the temptations that had nearly destroyed him in Alta. Blake waited beside the carriage, watching Hannah descend the courthouse steps. "Ready to go home?" he asked, helping her inside. "Home," Hannah repeated, the word filling her with warmth. "Yes, I'm ready." As their carriage pulled away, Blake took her hand, his thumb brushing over her mother's ring. "We can be married as soon as you'd like, unless you want a grand Denver wedding now that you're an heiress," Hannah laughed, leaning into his shoulder. "All I want is you and a preacher. The rest is just details." They were married a week later in the small church in Alta, the same one where both had once attended services separately, never imagining their paths would cross as they had. Hannah wore a new dress of cream satin, and Blake wore the suit from the harvest dance, freshly pressed. The townspeople came, curious to see the couple who had brought down Maxwell Thornton. Some were genuine in their well wishes, others came merely for the gossip. Hannah and Blake paid them little mind, too absorbed in each other to care what anyone thought. After the ceremony, they rode back to Hayes Ranch, their ranch now as husband and wife. Blake carried Hannah over the threshold, setting her down in the parlor that she had transformed months earlier from a bachelor's hodgepodge to a warm family home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Hayes," he said, pulling her close. "It's strange," Hannah mused, looking around. "This place felt like home long before we were married, from that first night when you burned the contract." "That was just paper," Blake said. "What we have now can't be written down or burned away." "No," Hannah agreed, rising on her toes to kiss him. It's much stronger than that. 1 year later, Hannah sat on the porch of Hayes Ranch, watching Blake teach their infant son to pat the nose of his gentlest mare. Walter visited often, sober now for 14 months and slowly rebuilding his relationship with Hannah. The inheritance had allowed them to expand the ranch, hire more hands, and even start a breeding program for some of the finest horses in the territory. But as Hannah watched her husband and son together in the golden afternoon light, she knew that the true treasure had nothing to do with her grandfather's money. It had begun the moment Blake, Hayes, struck a match to a contract and told her she was free to choose, and she had chosen love.